Richard Adewale wasn't just wealthy. He was the type of man people pointed at with admiration. Every magazine loved to write about him. Every business panel wanted him as a speaker. His name alone made investors feel safe. From real estate to tech, everything he touched seemed to turn into gold. He lived in a mansion so big that visitors often got lost before reaching the living room. Chandeliers glowed like captured stars. The floors shone like mirrors, and the gardens looked like something out of a fairy tale. But even with all that luxury, Richard never allowed success to change the softness of his heart. Because to him, true happiness wasn't in all the money or the fame. It was in his wife, Amara. Amara Adewale was gentle, wise, and had a smile that made Richard forget every stress in the world. Together, they were the type of couple people admired, not because of wealth, but because of the peace they carried. They loved each other loudly and quietly at the same time. Loud in affection, quiet in loyalty. They also had the two brightest gifts in their lives. Their twin daughters, Zara and Zuri, 5 years old, full of energy and questions and innocent dreams. Their home echoed with tiny footsteps, giggles, and the wild stories that only little children could invent. Richard often said, "Everything I am, I owe to my girls and their mother." And he meant every word. Every morning, he kissed Amara before leaving for work. Every evening, he came home early just to help the twins with homework, even though they spent most of the time drawing suns, flowers, and uneven stick people. Saturdays were for pancakes as a family. Sundays were for long drives and singing off-key to children's songs they barely knew the lyrics to. Life felt stable, beautiful, almost perfect. Richard truly believed nothing could break the world he had built with the woman he loved. But life has a way of hitting hardest when joy feels safest. It began with little things Richard brushed off at first. Amara would get tired more than usual. She would sit down more often, pressing a hand against her chest with a small wince. Richard asked if she was okay, and she always said the same thing, "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired." He believed her, until the night he found her collapsed on the floor. The world seemed to slow down as he rushed to her, shaking, calling her name, begging her to open her eyes. His hands trembled as he carried her into the car and sped to the hospital, running red lights, ignoring horns and angry drivers. Doctors rushed her to emergency care. Richard held the twins close in the waiting room, trying to stay calm for them, even though his entire body felt weak. His palms were cold. His heart felt like it was punching his ribs. Minutes stretched into hours. Every second felt heavier than the last. Finally, a doctor walked out. His face carried the kind of sadness that spoke louder than words. Richard already knew. He shook his head before the doctor even spoke. Amara was gone. Just like that, the light in Richard's life went out. The world that once felt bright and warm suddenly became dark and cold. He cried like he had never cried before. Not as a billionaire, not as a public figure, but as a man who had lost the one person who made everything make sense. The twins didn't fully understand what death meant, but they knew something terrible had happened. Their little voices asking, "Where's Mommy?" broke him even more. Richard buried Amara with shaking hands and shattered hope. And from that day on, the man who once had everything slowly began to lose it all. But the world didn't know yet, because grief was only beginning its heavy work on him. The night Amara died felt unreal to Richard. It felt like a terrible dream he was trapped inside, a nightmare that refused to end. Only hours before, she had been standing beside him on their balcony, wearing one of his oversized sweaters, laughing softly as the evening breeze lifted her hair. She leaned on his shoulder and pointed at the sky as if she wanted to show him each star personally. There was no sign, no warning, nothing to prepare him for what would come next. But the next morning, she couldn't stand. Her breathing was weak, her hands were cold, and her eyes looked distant. Richard carried her into the car like she weighed nothing, like she was made of paper. He drove with shaking hands, and every passing second felt like something inside him was breaking. In the hospital room, he held her hand tightly, but soon, even that hand became cold, too still, too quiet. When the doctor said, "I'm sorry," Richard felt the ground fall away beneath him. His world didn't just crack, it collapsed. From that moment, the man who had always been strong, focused, and admired by millions disappeared. All that remained was a grieving husband who couldn't breathe without pain. He stopped eating because food felt useless. He stopped sleeping because nightmares came after him whenever he closed his eyes. He stopped going to work because what was the point of success when the person he wanted to share it with was gone? His office chairs gathered dust. His secretary sent messages he never opened. His business meetings were canceled, rescheduled, then canceled again. Investors who once begged for his attention slowly drifted away. They whispered behind his back, "He's unstable now. He's lost focus. He isn't reliable anymore." But Richard didn't hear them. He didn't hear anything. He stayed inside his silent mansion, walking around like a shadow of the man he used to be. His suits hung untouched in the closet. His awards sat forgotten on shelves. The sound of his daughters playing in their room was the only thing that reminded him life still existed. But even then, grief held him too tightly. Meanwhile, his empire began to fall apart. Important contracts slipped through his fingers. Land properties were sold at low prices without his approval. Stockholders panicked and pulled out their investments. Banks began calling, sending warnings, demanding payments. And because Richard wasn't paying attention, because he couldn't, everything he had built slowly collapsed. Within months, the money that once seemed endless began to drain like water leaking from a cracked bucket. His staff members left one by one. Business partners stopped calling. Newspapers no longer wrote about his brilliance. They wrote about his fall. Within a year, the billionaire everyone once celebrated became a man who could barely stand. His clothes no longer fit right. His eyes looked tired and empty. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was only to keep his daughters from worrying. The world didn't wait for him to heal. It didn't pause for his pain, or slow down for his heartbreak. It simply moved on, while Richard stood frozen, trying to survive the night his world ended. He didn't know it yet, but the journey ahead would push him lower than he ever imagined, and force him to rise again for the two little girls who still depended on him. Richard's mansion, once full of light and laughter, slowly turned into a ghost house. The halls that used to echo with footsteps and children's giggles now held nothing but silence. Dust gathered on the glass tables. Curtains stayed closed for days. The family portraits on the wall seemed to watch him with sad eyes, as if the happiness in those frames belonged to another lifetime. Richard barely noticed. He moved through the mansion like someone underwater. Slow, heavy, drowning. Sleep and waking felt the same to him. Days blurred into nights and nights into mornings. Bills arrived in thick brown envelopes. At first, the staff dropped them on his desk. Later, they began leaving them on the floor because the desk was buried in unopened letters. Eventually, the staff stopped leaving anything at all, because one by one, they stopped coming. His chef left after months of unpaid salary. His drivers found new jobs. His cleaners, security guards, gardeners, all disappeared quietly, afraid to disturb the broken man sitting alone in the dark. The house grew colder with each goodbye. Only two people refused to leave his side. Zara and Zuri, his 7-year-old twins. They were far too young to understand depression, but old enough to feel that something was wrong. Their father wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't lifting them in the air like he used to. He barely spoke. Sometimes he didn't even look up when they called his name. But the girls didn't give up. Every morning, Zara would draw a picture with her crayons, stick figures of their family holding hands, and slide it under his bedroom door. Every afternoon, Zuri would try to make breakfast, even though she only knew how to fry eggs and sometimes burned them. Every night, they would crawl into his bed, hug him from both sides, and whisper, "Daddy, we're here." Their tiny hands tried to pull him out of the darkness, but grief had wrapped itself around him like chains. There were days he didn't eat unless the girls pushed the plate into his hands. Days he forgot to bathe until the girls tugged him toward the bathroom. Days he stared at the same wall for hours, lost in memories too painful to escape. The mansion that once held a beautiful family now felt like a prison made of sorrow. And eventually, it became too expensive to keep. One afternoon, a real estate agent arrived with papers. Richard didn't protest. He just signed whatever they put in front of him. The twins watched from the staircase as strangers walked through their home, measuring walls and whispering numbers. When the buyer moved in 2 weeks later, Richard packed what little he could carry. A suitcase of clothes, a box of the twins' toys, and Amara's framed wedding photo. Everything else, the cars, the furniture, the luxury, was gone. They moved into a single small room on the edge of town. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The window screeched when opened. The bathroom was shared with 6 other tenants. But Richard didn't complain. He didn't have the strength to. The twins arranged their 2 mattresses on the floor and taped their drawings to the cracked walls, trying to make the room feel like home. They smiled and said, "Daddy, it's okay. We're together." But outside that tiny room, the world treated Richard like a stranger. People who once fought for his attention now crossed the street when they saw him. Old business partners looked away, pretending not to recognize him. Neighbors whispered about how far the mighty had fallen. They didn't see the pain behind his tired eyes. They didn't care about the love he had lost. To them, he was no longer Richard Adewale the billionaire. He was just another broken man trying to survive. But to Zara and Zuri, he was still their father, the only parent they had left, and they would not let him disappear, no matter how heavy his sadness became. The morning started quietly, the kind of quiet that felt too heavy for such a small room. Richard lay on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, lost in the same emptiness that had filled him for months. The room was cold, the air stale, and for a moment he wondered if this was all his life would ever be now. A long, dark hallway with no light at the end. But then he heard it. A sound so soft he almost thought he imagined it. Crying. Not loud crying. Not tantrums. Just 2 tiny, trembling voices trying to hide their sadness. Richard slowly sat up. His heart tightened. He hadn't heard his daughters cry like that since the day Amara was buried. He pushed open the door and found them standing near the tiny electric cooker, their faces wet with tears. The sight pierced him deeper than any pain he had ever known. Zara stood in front, her hands blackened with burnt crumbs. Zuri clutched a pan with scrambled eggs that were so overcooked they looked like charcoal. The small table was covered in a mess of cracked eggshells, spilled salt, and smoke that still floated in the air. When they saw him, they froze, as if they expected him to be angry. We were trying to make breakfast," Zara said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "We wanted you to smile today," Zuri added in a small voice. "But it got burnt," Zara continued before her voice cracked. "We're sorry, Daddy. We just don't want you to be sad anymore," Zuri whispered. Those words, those tiny, desperate words, broke something inside him. But strangely, they healed something too. Richard knelt slowly, pulling both girls into his arms. They clung to him like they were afraid he might disappear again. Their small bodies shook with quiet sobs, and for the first time in a long time, Richard felt his own tears fall freely. Not from grief, from love, from the realization that his daughters were trying to save him, the same way he should have been saving them. "I'm sorry," he whispered into their hair. "Daddy is so sorry." The twins didn't say anything. They just held him tighter. When they finally pulled away, Richard looked around the little room. The peeling paint, the tiny broken fan, the empty shelves, the cold floor. This wasn't the life he wanted for them. This wasn't the future Amara had dreamed for her daughters. He stood up slowly and walked to the small cracked mirror hanging above a rusty nail on the wall. He stared at the reflection. His beard was overgrown. His eyes were sunken and red. His clothes hung loosely on his tired frame. He looked nothing like the man he used to be. But in that moment he realized something important. He might be broken, but he was still a father. And his daughters needed him alive, present, and strong, not drifting through life like a ghost. He touched the mirror with trembling fingers and said quietly, "No more. I won't let this be the end of our story." Because grief had taken enough from them. because suffering had stolen enough time, because if life refused to offer him a place, then he would carve one out of the world with his bare hands. He turned back to his daughters, wiped their tears and forced a smile. A real one, small but genuine. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's clean this up. Then Daddy will make breakfast properly." Their eyes brightened, just a little, and they nodded eagerly. That morning, in that cramped little room, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing magical happened. Just a father choosing to rise. Just a man deciding to fight again. And sometimes that's all it takes to start changing everything. The next morning, Richard woke before sunrise. It was the first time in months that he didn't wait for the day to drag him out of bed. He got up on his own. He washed his face in the cracked bathroom sink, combed his hair with his fingers, and put on the only clean shirt he owned. It used to be crisp and expensive, but now it looked worn and faded, the fabric thinning at the elbows. Still, it was the best he had. Zara and Zuri watched him button it slowly. Their eyes sparkled with hope. "Daddy, are you going to work today?" Zuri asked softly. "Not yet," Richard said, forcing a small smile. "But I'm going to look for one." The girls exchanged a glance, then rushed forward and hugged him tightly. "Good luck, Daddy," they whispered. Their tiny voices gave him strength. Richard walked for hours. The sun rose fully, then climbed higher, heating the dusty streets. Sweat collected on his neck, but he didn't stop. He visited every store, every shop, every business he could find. He wasn't looking for anything big, just anything that could keep his daughters fed, anything that would help him feel like a provider again. The first company he entered was a supermarket. The manager, a heavy-set man with a suspicious look in his eyes, stared at Richard from head to toe. "You want a job?" the manager asked, almost laughing. "Yes, sir. I can do anything. Packing shelves, cleaning, anything at all." The manager shook his head. "We're not hiring. Try somewhere else." Richard thanked him and walked out. The second place was a bakery. The owner frowned before Richard even finished speaking. "We can't hire you," she said sharply. "You look unstable. Customers might complain." Richard swallowed the sting in his throat. "I understand. Thank you." At the third place, a phone repair shop, the workers burst into laughter the moment he said he used to run a tech company. "A billionaire?" one of them mocked. "Bro, you? Like this?" Another pointed at his shoes, which had a tear at the side. "Even your shoes don't believe you." Richard forced himself to walk away without reacting. But rejection followed him everywhere he went. Some people listened for a few seconds, then shook their heads and turned away. Some refused to make eye contact. Some told him to leave before he scared the customers, as if grief made him dangerous. One receptionist even called security when he asked if the company needed cleaners. With each no, Richard felt smaller. The heat grew harsher. His legs ached. His throat was dry, but he couldn't stop. Every time he thought about giving up, he saw Zara and Zuri in his mind. Their little faces, their hopeful eyes. So he kept going. By afternoon, he reached a construction site. The workers there were lifting heavy bags of cement. Richard approached the supervisor, a muscular man with a stern face. "Please, sir," Richard said carefully. "I can do manual labor if needed." The supervisor didn't even pretend to consider it. "You?" he scoffed. "You don't look like you can lift a bag of rice, talk less of cement. Go home." Richard felt the shame burn in his chest. But he kept walking. He visited factories, warehouses, shops, offices, everywhere. And everywhere the answer was the same. No, no, no. By the time evening approached, his legs were trembling. His shirt was drenched in sweat. Dust clung to his clothes. His feet hurt. His body felt heavy. But his heart hurt the most. He reached the front of a building and leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His hands shook. For the first time that day, he let his shoulders fall. He felt defeated. He whispered to himself, "I'll take anything, anything at all." But the city didn't whisper back. It didn't offer comfort. It didn't offer opportunities. All he saw were closed doors, turned backs, and faces filled with doubt. The world had celebrated him when he was on top. Now that he was at his lowest, it acted like he didn't exist. Still, somewhere deep inside, a spark remained. A stubborn spark. Because even though every door stayed closed today, Richard knew he would wake up tomorrow and try again. For his daughters. For Amara's memory. For himself. The sun was unforgiving that afternoon, hanging in the sky like a burning coin. The heat pressed down on Richard's shoulders as if the world itself was trying to crush him. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat. His legs felt weak after walking from street to street, searching for work that never came. By noon, he hadn't heard a single yes. Only no space. Try somewhere else. We don't hire people like you. And the worst, you're wasting your time. Richard dragged himself to the side of the road and sat on the curb. His breath was shallow, and for the first time since he'd started searching for jobs, he felt tears burning behind his eyes. He bowed his head, his elbows resting on his knees, trying to gather the strength to keep going. He thought about Zara and Zuri. He thought about how they had hugged him that morning. He thought about their soft voices telling him, "Good luck, Daddy." But luck hadn't followed him. His throat tightened with frustration and helplessness. He felt like the world was beating him from every direction. Former billionaire or not, he was now just a tired man sitting on a dirty curb, invisible to everyone passing by. Then he heard footsteps stop in front of him. "Baba?" a voice said, rough but not unkind. "You day find work?" Richard lifted his head. A wheelbarrow pusher stood there, a young man with dusty clothes and strong arms. His shirt had holes, and sweat dripped down his forehead, but his eyes were full of understanding. Richard nodded weakly. The young man tilted his head toward the market behind them. "If you no get work, try this one. Inudei shemiani bunch." Richard blinked. The words were simple, yet they carried a kind of truth he hadn't expected. The young man wasn't mocking him. He wasn't pitying him. He was offering a real solution, one that didn't care about status or pride. "Wheelbarrow?" Richard repeated quietly. "Yes, nah. You fit rent one small money. Push load. Carry goods. You go make something," the man replied. Richard looked down at his hands. Hands that once signed million-dollar contracts and held microphones at global conferences. Hands that used to unlock expensive cars and write business strategies. Could those same hands push a wheelbarrow? He closed his eyes. Then he remembered Zara and Zuri's smiles. He remembered Amara's voice, gentle but firm, whispering, "No matter how hard life gets, keep going." He swallowed hard and stood. "Where can I rent one?" he asked. The young man's face broke into a small smile. "Follow me." The wheelbarrow rental stand was a small wooden shed with several old barrows lined up outside. Some had rusted metal edges, some had squeaky wheels. Richard stared at them, feeling a knot form in his stomach. The owner stepped out, a man with a deep voice and a towel around his neck. "You want rent?" he asked, raising an eyebrow at Richard. "Yes, please." The man studied him for a long second, then shrugged. "Take that one. 200 naira for the day." Richard paid from the little money he had left and gripped the handles of the wheelbarrow. It felt heavier than he expected. Cold metal, rough wood, uneven wheels. He could feel the weight of it through his palms. The young man who had spoken to him earlier clapped him on the shoulder. "Start small. It go get easier." It didn't get easier. Not at first. The work was brutal. Market women shouted at him to move faster. Traders argued over prices. Shoppers complained that he was too slow. Some people recognized him and whispered, shocked, "Is that not Richard Adiwale, the billionaire? Look at him now." He kept his eyes on the ground and pushed. He pushed until his muscles burned. He pushed until sweat ran down his entire body. He pushed until he thought he might collapse. But every load he carried, every bag of rice, every basket of tomatoes, every crate of drinks, brought him a few naira closer to his daughter's school fees. Every time his back ached, he imagined Amara's voice beside him. "Keep going, keep going, keep going." And so he did. because pride couldn't feed his daughters. But this wheelbarrow could. Because shame couldn't pay school fees. But determination could. Because grief had broken him, but love was teaching him how to rise again. And Richard pushed on, step after painful step. A father rebuilding his life with nothing but his strength, his will, and a rusty wheelbarrow. The market was a world of its own, loud, crowded, chaotic, and alive. Every corner buzzed with activity. Traders shouting prices, customers bargaining, children weaving between stalls, and wheelbarrows rolling over dusty ground. After a few weeks, Richard became part of that world. People began to recognize him, pointing at him with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. That one na Richie, the quiet barrow man. The one way no day shout. The one way always day smile like say life sweet am. Most people didn't know his past. They only knew the man they saw every day, working from morning till evening, steady, calm, and respectful. They called him Richie, a name simple enough to fit the new life he was building. He didn't mind. He didn't tell anyone who he used to be. He didn't brag. He didn't complain. He just worked. Some mocked him openly. This one don chop money finish, traders joked loudly. See how billionaire don turn barrow pusher. Life na film. No be everybody go get happy ending. They laughed, some out of wickedness, some out of confusion. How could a man who once ruled the business world now be pushing loads under the sun? But Richard didn't respond, not once. He would smile, nod politely, and keep working. Silence became his armor. Humility became his strength. And slowly, people noticed. Some admired him quietly, almost secretly. They noticed how he never argued with customers. How he always returned change honestly, even when people weren't paying attention. How he helped elderly traders lift heavy items without charging extra. And they noticed something else, something that made them respect him even more. Every evening, exactly the same time, Richie would leave the market no matter how many customers called him back. Richie, carry this load. Come now, a beg. Just one more. And he would always shake his head gently. I'm sorry. I have to go home. At first the traders were confused. Then they understood. He rushed home for his daughters. Zara and Zuri, now older, taller, brighter, waited for him every evening with their books spread out on the table. They would jump up the moment they heard his footsteps and hug him tightly. He never missed homework time. He never missed story time. He never missed prayer time. No matter how tired he was, he would sit with them, help them read, guide them through math, and encourage their dreams. And the market people watched, quietly, respectfully. Some of them, especially the women, whispered among themselves, "This man get good heart. He loved those children. Nah better father." But there was something else they admired even more. Richard refused to tolerate injustice. Whenever he saw a young girl being harassed by boys or rude customers, he stepped in immediately. "Leave her alone," he would say, his voice firm but calm. At first, people didn't take him seriously. He was just a wheelbarrow man. But the first time he grabbed a man's wrist to stop him from pulling a girl's arm, the entire market took notice. He wasn't loud. He wasn't violent. But he was brave, steady, and unshakable. From that day on, girls in the market felt safer when Richie was around. Some even greeted him with grateful smiles. "Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for yesterday." And he would respond with his usual gentle smile. "You're safe. That's what matters." At home, his daughters blossomed like flowers in sunlight. Zara grew into a quiet genius who loved reading and dreamed of becoming a doctor. Zuri became bold and compassionate, always defending others, just like her father defended her. They saw how hard he worked. They saw how much he sacrificed. They saw the pain he carried and the love that pushed him forward. And they made a promise, spoken and unspoken. They would rise. For him. Every exam they passed, every competition they won, every good grade they brought home, they placed in his hands like gifts, hoping it would make him proud. And it did. They became his strength, his reason, his hope. And as the years passed, The market knew him not as a fallen billionaire, but as a good man, a strong man, a father who refused to give up. The man they called, with growing respect, Richie the Market Man. Years passed like pages turning in a book, and the tiny girls who once drew crayon hearts for their grieving father slowly grew into young women with big dreams. Zara and Zuri were no longer the 7-year-olds who cried in a broken kitchen, wishing they could take their father's sadness away. They had become determined, focused, brilliant, because they carried their father's sacrifice like a fire inside them. Growing up in a tiny room, studying under a flickering bulb, and sharing a small mattress didn't stop them. If anything, it pushed them to work harder. They watched their father leave every morning with an empty wheelbarrow and return at night with tired legs, aching hands, and a smile he forced just for them. They never forgot it. They never wanted it to be in vain. When they reached secondary school, something incredible happened. They excelled. Not because life was easy, but because they treated every test like a chance to change their future. Zara loved science, especially physics and mathematics. She spent hours solving problems that made other students groan. Her notebooks were filled with diagrams, equations, and ideas of things she wanted to build someday. Zuri loved biology. The human body fascinated her. She loved understanding how things worked, how cells repaired themselves, how hearts beat, how bones healed. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, someone who saved lives, the way she wished she could have saved her mother. Together, the twins became unstoppable. Teachers adored them, classmates admired them, principals bragged about them. By the time they wrote their final exams, the whole district already knew their names. And when results came out, they didn't just pass, they topped their district. Number 1 and number 2. Side by side, just as they had always been. Their father cried that day. Not the tears of grief he once knew, but tears of overwhelming pride. He held their certificates with shaking hands and whispered, "My girls, you've made me so proud." University was another mountain to climb. Money was tight, tighter than ever, but the twins refused to let that stop them. They applied for scholarships. They studied day and night. They wrote essays that told their story, not to gain pity, but to show their determination. And it worked. Zara earned a full engineering scholarship. Zuri earned a medical scholarship. Their father stood beside them at the bus park the morning they left for university. He wore his cleanest shirt, held their bags with trembling hands, and smiled with a mixture of pride and fear. "You'll do well," he said. "You always do." The twins hugged him tightly, promising to make him proud. University life was tough, but they were tougher. Zara studied engineering with the intensity of someone who wanted to change the world. She joined robotics clubs, built prototypes, and won competitions that earned her even more scholarships. Zuri buried herself in anatomy textbooks, attended surgeries as an observer, volunteered at clinics, and became one of the top students in her department. People loved them everywhere they went, not just for their intelligence, but for their humility. Despite all the praise, they remained grounded because they knew where they came from. They knew a man was out there under the burning sun, pushing a wheelbarrow just so they could sit in classrooms filled with opportunities. Every time exams got hard, every time stress weighed them down, every time they felt tired, they closed their eyes and saw one image: their father, sweating under the sun, gripping a rusty wheelbarrow with blistered hands, his back bent, his arms shaking, but still pushing, still smiling, still trying. That image became their fuel, their motivation, their reason to keep going. By the time they graduated, they were not the girls who used to live in a single tiny room. They were professionals, confident, capable, respected. Zara became a certified engineer in a top firm. Zuri became a brilliant young doctor working at a reputable hospital. They were finally rising, flying, becoming everything their father sacrificed for. But no matter how high they climbed, they never forgot the foundation that carried them. The man who pushed a wheelbarrow so they could take flight. And soon, they would return to give him the life he truly deserved. The sun was brutal that afternoon, pouring heat over the market like fire. Richard wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm and pushed his wheelbarrow through the crowd. His shirt clung to his body, dusty and soaked, but he moved with the same calm determination he always carried. To most people in the market, he was just Richie the wheelbarrow man, humble, quiet, hard-working. No one imagined he had once been a billionaire. No one imagined the life he had lived before tragedy broke him. So when the luxurious SUV rolled into the market, no one connected it to him. It was the kind of vehicle people only saw in movies. Sleek, shiny, deep black paint that looked like glass, tinted windows, and tires that moved over the dusty ground like kings refusing to touch dirt. People stopped talking. Traders paused their arguments mid-sentence. Women carrying baskets on their heads froze. Children stopped running. The entire market fell silent. "Which big man day come here?" someone whispered. "Nah, governor?" another asked. "Or celebrity?" Everyone watched as the SUV came to a smooth stop right in the center of the market, exactly where Richard was pushing his wheelbarrow. He didn't pay attention at first. He simply moved aside, thinking the car needed space to pass. Then the back doors opened, and the world changed. Two young women stepped out, tall, elegant, beautifully dressed in corporate outfits that screamed success. Their heels clicked softly on the ground. Their hair was neat and stylish. Their bags were expensive enough to buy half the market. Shock raced through the crowd. Who be these ones? Fine girls. Dem resemble celebrities. Richard didn't even realize they were looking at him. He was too busy shifting his wheelbarrow out of their way, too used to being invisible. But then, "Daddy!" The voice cracked, soft, emotional, charged with years of love. Richard froze. Slowly he turned. Zara and Zuri were standing there, his daughters. Not the small children he tucked into bed each night years ago, but powerful, successful young women, glowing, grown, transformed. Their eyes filled with tears the moment they saw the dust on his clothes, the sweat on his face, the cracks in his shoes, the wheelbarrow in his hands. "Daddy," Zuri whispered again. Before anyone could understand what was happening, the twins ran toward him. Not caring about the dust, not caring about the crowd, not caring about their expensive clothes. They dropped to their knees in front of him. Gasps exploded from every corner of the market. Two successful young women, kneeling in the dirt. For a wheelbarrow man? Zara grabbed his hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Zuri wrapped her arms around his waist, crying openly. "Daddy, please stand," Zara sobbed. "We came to take you home." Richard's wheelbarrow slipped from his hands and thudded against the ground. He stood frozen, breath shaking, eyes wide. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. His little girls, his tiny twins, had become these incredible women. And they were kneeling for him, hugging him, calling him daddy with so much love that the entire market felt it. His lips trembled. Tears filled his eyes. His hands shook as he touched their faces, as if he feared they weren't real. "My daughters," he whispered, voice cracking. "My babies." People couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Phones came out instantly. Videos started recording. Someone shouted, "Nah him daughters." Another screamed, "Dem come carry am. Dem come carry Richie." And then, the whole market exploded into noise. Claps, cheers, shouts of joy, people crying, laughing, celebrating. They surrounded the family but kept a respectful distance, overwhelmed by the moment. Zara and Zuri stood slowly, each holding one of their father's hands. "Daddy," Zuri said gently through tears. "You've suffered enough," Zara added. "Let us take care of you now." Richard finally broke. He cried, deeply, loudly, like a dam bursting after years of holding in pain. The twins held him on both sides as they guided him toward the SUV. He looked back once, at the wheelbarrow, at the market, at the life that had held his broken pieces together. Then he stepped into the SUV, into a new chapter he never believed he would see again. As the doors closed and the car pulled away, the market erupted one last time with cheers. The videos spread online within hours. and everywhere people watched a single powerful moment. The wheelbarrow man being lifted into a luxury car by the daughters he sacrificed everything for. By evening, the entire country was buzzing. Videos of Zara and Zuri kneeling in the market, crying as they hugged their father, had already gone viral. Every major social media platform was flooded with posts, comments, and emotional reactions. "I can't stop crying. Look how they honored their dad. True definition of love. God bless those girls." Some people even stitched the video with older clips of Richard from his billionaire days, his old interviews, his business speeches, and the internet gasped. Richie the wheelbarrow man was once Richard Adewale, the billionaire. The revelation hit like a lightning bolt. By nighttime, news stations scrambled to report the story. Former billionaire found pushing wheelbarrow. Twins pick up father from the market. An emotional reunion. Man who lost everything returns to the world with his daughter's success. Cameras camped outside his daughter's new home. Reporters begged for interviews. Influential people who once ignored him suddenly wanted his attention. One news anchor said with awe, "Mr. Adewale's daughters didn't just succeed. They came back for him." People who had mocked him in the market remained silent, too embarrassed to speak. Some cried. Some apologized online. Some deleted the videos they once posted of him pushing loads. Everyone wanted to be on his side now. Companies sent messages begging him to work with them. "We want you as our consultant. We are offering a partnership. We believe your experience is invaluable. We would be honored to have you join our team." CEOs who once wouldn't let him into their offices were now offering him millions. But Richard always replied calmly, gently, "I am a father before anything else. And everything I am today is because of my daughters." He didn't rush into any deal. He didn't brag. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't throw insults, because the storm inside him had passed. He had found peace, the kind of peace money couldn't buy. Life changed, but Richard remained simple. He moved in with Zara and Zuri, not into a mansion or a luxury estate, but into a warm, beautiful home they built together. It wasn't overly large. It wasn't filled with gold or marble, but it had sunlight, softness, laughter, and love. Everything his heart needed. The kitchen was always filled with the smell of something cooking. The living room had framed pictures of their journey, childhood photos, university graduations, and now the viral reunion. His daughters made sure he never felt alone again. Zuri would come home from the hospital with stories of patients she saved. Zara would show him her engineering projects and new inventions she was working on. Richard listened with pride glowing in his eyes. Every night, they ate dinner together, talking about their day, laughing, teasing one another. And every night, the house felt full of the life they had rebuilt together. Richard healed slowly. Some days he still remembered the mansion he lost. Some days he remembered the wealth, the fame, the business world. But he no longer felt pain from it. He had lost money, but he had gained something far more valuable. A second chance. A restored family. Peaceful heart. And every morning, before the twins woke up, Richard stepped into the quiet backyard, lifted his eyes to the sky, and whispered the same words to the woman who changed him forever. "Amara, I kept my promise. I raised our girls well." Then he would smile, because he knew, wherever she was smiling back. Richard didn't rebuild his life with greed or desperation. He rebuilt it with gratitude, with patience, with calm, with love. He had been a billionaire once. He had been a wheelbarrow pusher. Now he was simply a father, and that was the greatest title he ever earned.